need to admit something about my job. For 11 years, I've been trained to believe that good preservation means picking one true historical moment and stripping away everything added after it, that layering is contamination, not character. It's the first principle they teach you in graduate school, the one that shows up on every certification exam. Identify the period of significance, document what belongs to it, and treat every later addition as an intrusion to be evaluated and usually removed. I've built an entire career in Savannah restoring antebellum townhouses and Gilded Age storefronts around exactly that logic. Pick the moment, defend the moment, everything else is noise. I've spent client meetings arguing, sometimes successfully, for the removal of additions that owners had lived with for decades, on the grounds that those additions weren't period appropriate, a phrase I used constantly and had never once had to seriously defend against someone who actually disagreed with the underlying premise. Then my old professor called me from Hungary. Catalin Rax taught the seminar that basically invented my professional instincts, back when I was 24, and certain that preservation was a science with clean answers. She's Hungarian-American, raised partly in Budapest before her family emigrated when she was a teenager, and she's spent the last several years back in the country of her birth, consulting on conservation projects the way she used to consult on my thesis drafts, with more patience than I deserved and considerably less patience for sloppy reasoning. I'd kept in loose touch with her over the years, the way you do with a professor who shaped you more than you fully realized at the time, an email exchange every few months, the occasional conference where our paths happened to cross. This call felt different from those. She called on a weekday afternoon, her voice carrying the specific energy she gets when she's found something that's going to upend a student's assumptions, which after all these years still apparently includes me. She was working on a structural stabilization project at a Roman-era burial complex beneath the city of Pécs in southern Hungary, she said, and she needed a second set of trained eyes on a decision the local team was about to make. Not urgently urgent, not yet, but close enough that she wanted me there within the week rather than the month I would have preferred. I asked why an American preservation architect needed to fly across an ocean for a decision that presumably belonged to Hungarian conservators. She told me, in the tone she used to use right before dismantling one of my undergraduate arguments, that she wanted someone in the room who still believed in the one true period doctrine, because the site she was about to show me had spent 400 years disproving it, and she thought it might finally be useful for me to watch that argument happen in person instead of reading about it in a journal. She also, characteristically, refused to tell me anything more specific over the phone, saying only that some sites you have to actually stand inside before an explanation means anything. I booked a flight 2 days later. I told my firm I needed a week for a research consultation, which was technically true and left out most of what I actually expected to happen. I packed the way I always pack for site visits, more out of habit than necessity, and spent most of the flight rereading a paper Catalin had sent ahead. 3 pages of dense technical language about groundwater and plaster adhesion that told me almost nothing about what she actually wanted me to feel once I got there. I still didn't fully believe, boarding that plane, that a 4th century burial chamber and my entire professional training were about to end up in the same argument. Budapest meets you first as a study in deliberate duality. The city only became a single entity in 1873, when Buda, rising on its hilly western bank with its royal heritage and older bones, formally unified with Pest, the flatter, more commercially restless district across the Danube. You can still feel the seam if you know to look for it. Buda holds its history close, quiet streets climbing toward Castle Hill, while Pest sprawls outward with the confident, slightly showy energy of a 19th century capital building itself a skyline to match Vienna's. The Hungarian Parliament building anchors that skyline from the riverbank, its Gothic revival spires and central dome completed at the turn of the 20th century specifically as a declaration of national unity after centuries of division. Inside it, under permanent ceremonial guard, sits the Holy Crown of St. Stephen, the crown Hungary's first Christian king wore roughly 1,000 years ago, still treated today as a literal, physical embodiment of the state itself rather than a museum object behind glass. Near the river, small bronze shoes cast in rows along the embankment mark a darker chapter of the same city's history, a quiet, deliberately unspectacular memorial to a specific wartime atrocity that Catalin walked me past without much comment, letting the shoes themselves do whatever explaining they needed to do. Across the water, Buda Castle rises on its hill above both districts, a fortress that has been built, damaged, and rebuilt so many times across 7 centuries that no single version of it has ever been the final word, each era's builders working whether they meant to or not, on top of everything the previous ones had left behind rather than starting clean. Catalin met me at a cafe near Matthias Church on Castle Hill and let me sit with the building for a few minutes before she said anything at all, which I understood, once she started talking, to be entirely intentional. Matthias Church has stood on that site in some form since the 13th century, its steep, vividly tiled roof visible from across the river, and its history reads less like a single narrative than a stack of unrelated ones pressed on top of each other. It served as a royal coronation church under Hungarian kings, including the coronation of the king it's now named for. Under Ottoman occupation, it operated as a mosque for well over a century, its Christian frescoes plastered over and its interior reoriented toward Mecca. After the Ottomans were pushed out, it was reconsecrated, restored, rebuilt again after further war damage in the 20th century, and today functions once more as a working Catholic church that also, quietly, still contains physical traces of every phase in between, if you know which wall to look at and which restoration report to read closely enough. Catalin let me take that in, and then asked me the question she'd clearly flown me out to ask. Which one of those periods, by my own professional training, would I consider the true one worth preserving, and which ones would I have been trained to treat as intrusions? I didn't have a good answer. That was, I think, exactly the point. We drove south the next morning, toward Pécs, through rolling country that gradually turned warmer and more Mediterranean in feel as we climbed into the foothills of the Mosque Mountains. Pécs is one of Hungary's oldest cities, its roots reaching back to a Roman settlement called Sopiane, and it wears that layered inheritance more openly than almost anywhere else in the country. At the center of town, Zeshenyi Square holds Baroque facades and busy cafes, arranged around a domed building that used to be the Mosque of Pasha Gazi Qasim, built by the occupying Ottomans in the 16th century directly on the foundation of a demolished Gothic church, using much of that church's own stone. When Ottoman rule ended, the building wasn't torn down and rebuilt from scratch. It was reconsecrated as a Catholic church, with the Islamic dome and the recognizably Ottoman exterior left essentially intact. A cross now mounted where a crescent once stood, Arabic calligraphy from the original mosque's interior still faintly visible in places beneath later Christian additions. Locals just call it the Inner City Parish Church now, a name so plain it undersells everything the building has actually survived to become. It is, structurally and spiritually, both buildings at once, and it has been for roughly 400 years, without anyone deciding it needed to resolve itself into a single identity. I was wrong about something. Standing in that square, I'd assumed, walking in, that a building like this would read as compromise and uneasy truce between two incompatible pasts, tolerated rather than embraced. It doesn't read that way at all. It reads as intentional, cared for, genuinely beloved by the city around it, a working church that also, unmistakably, still looks like what it used to be, right down to the shape of the windows. Not far away, the Zolnay Porcelain Works, founded in the same city in the 19th century, still produces the distinctive iridescent ceramic tiles that show up on rooftops and monuments across Hungary, including on Matthias Church's own patterned roof back in Budapest, one more local tradition that spent a century absorbing outside techniques and influences without ever fully surrendering its own identity to any of them, and one more quiet thread tying the two cities together that I wouldn't have noticed if Catalin hadn't pointed it out standing in front of the factory's old showroom. Catalin told me, watching me work through the mosque church, that this was more or less the point she'd wanted me to arrive at on my own before she took me to the actual site she needed help with. That Pécs treats its layered identity not as a problem requiring resolution, but as the actual substance of what makes the place itself. A community of different faiths and ethnicities that has, in one form or another, occupied the same handful of streets for close to 2,000 years, without any one group ever fully erasing what came before it. The site itself sits a short walk from the square, beneath an unassuming modern visitor center that gives almost no hint of what lies underneath it. Pécs sits atop the remains of Sopiane's Roman-era necropolis, an extensive underground burial complex dating to the 4th century, when the city was already an established provincial center within the Roman Empire and a growing number of its residents were quietly practicing an, at the time, illegal new religion. The burial chambers beneath the modern streets include some of the earliest surviving Christian frescoes anywhere in the Roman world, images of vines, peacocks, and biblical scenes painted on plaster walls 16 centuries ago, preserved by nothing more sophisticated than being buried and largely forgotten until systematic excavation began in earnest in the 20th century. Catalin walked me through one of the already stabilized chambers first. A wine jug motif still faintly visible on one wall, before taking me to the one that had actually brought her back to Hungary that season. The whole complex is a UNESCO World Heritage Site now, protected on paper, and actively, physically, threatened underneath that protection by something no designation can fix on its own: groundwater, working its way up through soil that has shifted and settled over 16 centuries in ways nobody fully mapped before building a modern city directly on top of it. Catalin walked me down into the chamber she'd actually flown me out to see, a burial vault holding one of the best preserved fresco cycles in the complex, and introduced me to Gabor Fekete, the conservation engineer who'd been monitoring the site's structural condition for the better part of 3 years. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He showed me directly what had been keeping him up at night. A section of plaster near the chamber's northeastern corner where recent water infiltration had begun, lifting the original paint layer away from the wall beneath it. A slow, silent process of separation that, left unaddressed, would eventually cause that section of fresco to simply fall away in pieces. 1,600 years of survival ending not in some dramatic collapse but in a kind of patient, quiet dissolving. The technical problem, once Gabor laid it out, was genuinely difficult in a way that had nothing to do with money or bureaucracy and everything to do with an unresolvable tension inside conservation ethics itself. The most reversible, most philosophically correct stabilization methods, traditional lime-based consolidants, slow, careful, minimally invasive, required controlled drying conditions and multiple weeks of gradual application to work properly. Weeks the chamber didn't currently have, with a significant rain system tracking toward the region within days and no way to fully seal the site from ambient moisture in the meantime. The faster, more aggressive option, a modern synthetic resin injected directly behind the loosened plaster, would almost certainly stop the separation in its tracks within hours rather than weeks. It would also permanently alter the fresco's material composition in a way that couldn't later be undone, potentially interfering with future analytical techniques nobody had invented yet, and running against the most basic tenet of the field both Gabor and I had been trained in. Whatever you do to historic material, you should be able to undo it later, once you know more than you know now. Gabor had a decision in front of him with no comfortable version. Wait for the properly reversible method, and risk losing an irreplaceable, unrepeatable piece of 4th century material to a storm system that showed no sign of changing course. Or intervene immediately with an irreversible modern material, permanently compromising the theoretical purity of the site's preservation record in order to guarantee that any of it survived at all to be studied by anyone, ever, under any method. He'd already run the numbers on drying time twice, he told us, hoping the second calculation would somehow leave him more room than the first one had. It didn't. The storm track had firmed up overnight, and the forecast window he'd been counting on had shrunk by nearly 2 full days. I recognized the shape of that decision immediately, and recognized, at almost the same moment, that my own professional training had never actually prepared me to make it. I'd spent 11 years being taught to defend the correct method as though it existed independently of circumstance, as though the ethics of preservation could be settled once, in a classroom, and then simply applied identically to every situation afterward. Standing in that chamber, watching Gabor weigh a genuinely unrepeatable loss against a genuinely irreversible compromise, I understood that the actual work, the work Catalin had flown me out specifically to watch, had never been about identifying the single correct answer. It had always been about deciding, under real pressure, with real stakes, which specific kind of imperfection you were willing to live with. He chose to intervene. Working with a specialist flown in from Budapest on short notice, Gabor spent the better part of 2 days preparing and carefully injecting a modern consolidant behind the most critically detached sections of plaster, working in small, painstaking increments, testing color match and surface texture at every stage, trying to minimize the visual and material footprint of an intervention he'd already accepted couldn't be made invisible. I stood at the edge of the chamber for most of the second day, watching him work with a headlamp and a magnifying loupe in a space barely large enough for 2 people to stand upright, checking his own progress by hand as much as by any instrument. The same way, I found myself thinking, an engineer somewhere on a French cliff or a Danish sand dune had checked their own work by hand rather than fully trusting a single reading. The storm arrived 2 nights later, heavier than forecast, enough rain that the visitor center closed the site entirely for 3 days as a precaution. When Gabor finally got back in to check the chamber, the treated sections had held. The plaster stayed bonded to the wall behind it. The fresco vines, a faded peacock, the ghost of a biblical scene 1600 years old was still there, altered now in ways only a specialist would ever be able to detect, but still undeniably there. Nobody treated it as an unambiguous win, least of all Gabor. He told Catalin and me, over coffee once the site reopened, that he still didn't know, and might never fully know, whether he'd made the correct call or simply the survivable one, and that the difference between those 2 things had stopped feeling as clear to him as it used to. He'd made calls like it before, on smaller sections of the same complex, sometimes waiting when he probably should have acted, sometimes acting when a slower method would have held just fine enough of both over enough years that he'd stopped expecting any single decision to fully vindicate itself. That admission, more than anything else on the trip, was the one that actually landed for me. I'd flown to Hungary, assuming Catalin wanted me to witness a triumph of pragmatic conservation over rigid dogma. What she'd actually wanted me to witness was a genuinely difficult, genuinely unresolved trade-off, made by someone willing to own the fact that it might not have been the right one. Once the immediate crisis had passed, Catalin had a few days built into my visit before my flight home, and she used them, deliberately, to show me how far this same pattern extended across the rest of the country, not as a detour from the real lesson, but as the actual scale of it. We drove north to Eger, a town cradled in the hills of northern Hungary that carries one of the country's most fiercely remembered military histories. In 1552, a small Hungarian garrison inside Eger's castle withstood a siege by a vastly larger Ottoman force, an act of defiance that has been retold and mythologized ever since as a defining moment of national resolve. The castle still stands, its walls patched and rebuilt across 5 subsequent centuries, and the town beneath it produces Bikaver, bull's blood, a bold red wine whose name is popularly tied to that same siege legend, holding that the defenders drank it so visibly, staining their beards red, that Ottoman soldiers spread rumors they'd been fortified by the blood of bulls. A minaret from the later Ottoman occupation still rises a short walk from the castle, standing directly alongside Baroque church spires built after the Ottomans were finally driven out for good. One more instance of a victory, and its former occupier's architecture sharing the same skyline without either one being erased to make room for the other. We climbed the minaret's narrow spiral stairs mostly, I think, because Catalin wanted me to physically stand inside the layer I'd otherwise only have looked at from the street. and the view from the top made the whole town's stacked history legible in a single turn of the head castle. Church spires, minaret, vineyards, all visible at once, none of them cropped out of the frame to make the others look cleaner. Szentendre, closer to Budapest along the Danube, told a gentler version of the same story. The town was originally settled by Serbian refugees fleeing Ottoman advances further south, and their Orthodox churches, domed and gold icon-lined, still stand quietly beside the pastel Baroque houses and modern art galleries that have made the town one of Hungary's most active artist communities. Painters worked in the open courtyards while we walked through, capturing the specific quality of light off the river, and a few sculptors had set up shop in shaded side streets, chiseling stone in full view of anyone passing. Catalin pointed out that the town's entire identity runs on a version of the principle we'd already seen twice: different waves of people, different faiths, different centuries, none of them displacing what came before, all of them still visibly, physically present in the same handful of streets. We stopped at Esztergom on the way back, where Hungary's largest church rises above a bend in the Danube on the site where Saint Stephen, the country's first Christian king, was born a little over 1,000 years ago. The current basilica was built in the 19th century atop the ruins of several earlier cathedrals, each one destroyed in turn by war or time. Its dome visible for miles, and its terrace looking directly across the river into Slovakia, a literal, physical vantage point where two countries' histories sit close enough to touch. Inside, the basilica holds what's often cited as the largest altarpiece painted on a single canvas anywhere in the world, and a treasury of relics spanning centuries of continuous religious practice on the same ground, through empire after empire. Catalin mentioned, almost in passing, that if you time a visit for late winter, you can still catch a very different kind of continuity a few hours south, in the small Danube town of Mohacs, where a UNESCO-recognized festival called Busoyaras fills the streets with men in carved wooden masks and sheepskin cloaks, driving away the last of winter with drums, fire, and the burning of a straw effigy, a ritual popularly tied to local legend about frightening off Ottoman raiders centuries ago, still performed today less as reenactment than as an actual, functioning part of the town's yearly calendar. Further south and west, Lake Balaton opened up in front of us like something closer to an inland sea than a lake. Central Europe's largest body of freshwater, ringed by vineyards growing in volcanic soil, and, on the Tihany Peninsula, fields of lavender laid out beside basalt cliffs, formed by the same ancient volcanic activity that shaped the wine country around it. We stopped for a while at the edge of one of those cliffs, looking out over water that shifted from pale blue to something closer to rose gold as the afternoon wore on. And Catalin told me the lake has functioned as a kind of shared cultural refuge for generations of Hungarians, regardless of what era or government happened to be governing the country around it. Poets, dissidents, ordinary families, all finding something usable in the same water under wildly different political circumstances, the lake itself indifferent to all of it. Out on the eastern plains, Hortobágy National Park gave me the clearest possible image of continuity, operating at the scale of an entire landscape rather than a single building. It's the largest natural grassland left in Central Europe, flat enough that the horizon genuinely seems to dissolve into the sky, and it still supports Székely's herdsmen practicing techniques that have barely changed in centuries, driving herds of gray cattle and curly-horned raka sheep across land that has been grazed the same way for generation after generation. One of them, an older man Catalin seemed to know slightly from a previous visit, let me watch him work a small group of horses through a training exercise that had clearly been passed down rather than learned from any manual, each command small and economical, the kind of skill that doesn't photograph as dramatically as it actually is to watch up close. He'd been doing this, he told Catalin in Hungarian while she translated for me, since he was younger than his own grandson was now, and his grandson had already started learning the same handful of gestures the summer before. A 9-arch stone bridge crosses one of the park's slow rivers, an old, practical piece of infrastructure that somehow also reads, standing in front of it, as a kind of monument to exactly the same patience everything else on this trip had been demonstrating. Migratory birds use the park's wetlands as a way station on transcontinental journeys that predate the country itself by a wide margin. One more layer of use stacked on top of everything human beings have done to this same flat, wind-scoured ground. On my last full day, Catalin took me back into Budapest itself to close the loop where the trip had started, at the city's thermal baths. Budapest sits directly on top of a geological fault line, and more than 100 natural hot springs rise through it, a resource Roman settlers were already using 2,000 years ago, later expanded dramatically under Ottoman occupation, which is why the city's most famous bathhouses, the Széchenyi and the Gellért, still carry visibly Ottoman-influenced domes and mosaic work alongside later imperial-era additions, all of it still in continuous daily use by ordinary Budapest residents rather than preserved behind glass as a museum piece. Outside the city, near Lake Balaton, Catalin told me about Heves, the largest swimmable thermal lake in the world, fed by hot and cold springs deep enough underground that its entire volume of water reportedly refreshes itself within a matter of days. Its surface dotted with water lilies, even as steam rises off it on cold mornings. One more instance of something ancient and something actively, continuously renewing itself, occupying the exact same physical space without contradiction. We sat in the steam at the Gellért for a while that last afternoon, not talking much, watching retirees and tourists and off-duty office workers share the same water, the way people here have been sharing it for 2 millennia. Under Roman administrators, Ottoman pashas, Habsburg emperors, and everyone since, none of whom ever managed, or apparently even tried, to claim the baths as belonging exclusively to their own particular era. I flew home 2 days later. Catalin stayed. Obviously, Hungary is where her actual work is now. In a way I understood much better having spent a week inside it than I had understood it from her occasional emails over the years. We've talked more since the trip than we did in the several years before it, mostly circling back, in one form or another, to some version of the same unresolved question neither of us has fully answered. How much of what I'd call damage in a building back home is actually just a layer somebody hasn't yet learned to see as belonging there? She teased me, on one of those calls, about a 19th century porch addition I'd once argued a client should remove from a Savannah townhouse purely on period appropriateness grounds. I didn't have a good comeback. I'm not sure I would make that same argument today. She called me about 6 weeks after I'd landed back in Savannah with an update from Gabor. The consolidated section at Sopiane had held through the region's wetter autumn months, no further separation detected on the most recent inspection, though he'd told her, in the same careful, unglamorous tone he'd used with both of us in the chamber that first week, that a few dry months proves less than people want it to prove, and that the actual test would be next spring's thaw, and the one after that, and every one after that indefinitely. I found that answer more honest than a clean bill of health would have been. I don't think the lesson I took from that week is really about frescoes or mosques turned into churches. Not only, it's about how easily my own field had trained me to treat authentic as a fixed target sitting somewhere in the past, waiting to be uncovered and defended, rather than something closer to what Pécs actually does with it, a living argument, still ongoing, between everyone who has ever occupied the same physical space and refused to fully erase whoever came before them. The mosque church in Pécs isn't a compromise between two authentic states. It is, itself, the authentic state, exactly as much as either version it used to be. The burial chamber isn't less true now for carrying a trace of 21st century resin alongside its 4th century plaster. It's true in a slightly different, slightly more complicated way than it was true the week before Gabor made his call. What stays with me most isn't the scale of any single site. Honestly, not the size of Esztergom's dome, not the age of the frescoes, not even the drama of a storm bearing down on an open excavation. It's the image of Gabor checking his own work by hand in a space barely large enough to stand in, refusing to fully trust either the old method or the new one without personally verifying what was actually happening under his fingers. I think about how much of what actually survives in a building or a country or a field like mine depends on someone willing to sit inside a genuinely unresolved trade-off, make the call anyway, and then keep checking on it for years rather than declaring the question closed the day the intervention held. I think, too, about every building back home I've argued should be stripped back to a single correct period, and how many of those arguments I'd probably make differently now if I made them again. A short breath before I let you go. If this story changed how you think about what authentic actually requires, I'd genuinely like to know which part of it stayed with you. Because somewhere beneath a quiet Hungarian square right now, a 4th century fresco is holding onto a wall with the help of a material invented a few decades ago, and neither one has any intention of pretending the other doesn't exist. How many of the places we call timeless are actually just several different eras, standing close enough together that we've stopped being able to see the seams between them? This narrative is told through the perspective of Dana Whitcomb, a fictional historic preservation architect, and includes the fictional composite characters Catalin Roch and Gabor Fekete. The historical, architectural, and geological details of Hungary described here, including the Gazi Qasim Pasha Mosque Church in Pécs and the Sopiane Early Christian Necropolis, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, are real and presented as accurately as possible at the time of writing. The specific fresco chamber, the groundwater crisis, and the on-site conservation decision described in this script are a fictionalized composite, not a documented real event.